Welcome to Best Decision Ever. We believe life comes down to very few moments and decisions. So on this show, we highlight the great people that have had the courage to overcome fear and make the decision to start that business, begin writing that blog, or just stand up for what they believe in. It helps that we can learn their habits, routines, and mindsets and apply those to our own lives. For those of you who are new, my name is John. I'm your host. Today, a very special guest. She's the author of Seed to Harvest, which is a picture book that explains what venture capital is and why it's important under 50 pages. Before graduating college, she raised $1.6 million to start Behind Genius Ventures, where they invest in pre-seed and seed companies. And most recently, at the age of 23, she's been named Forbes 30 under 30. Without further ado, Paige Finn Doherty. Thank you for coming on the show today, Paige.
Wow, thank you. That was so cinematic. I so appreciate the nice intro.
Of course. I'm not going to lie. It takes a little bit of practice, but here we are. We're alive and we're here.
I love it. You pronounced everything correctly. Everything.
Oh, you noticed too. Yeah, I had to practice. I appreciate it. So let's dive in. What is Behind Genius Ventures? And I want to better understand too, why did you start it?
So big question. We're starting off with a good one. Okay, so I'm Paige. I'm one of the founding partners of BGV. So when I think about BGV, like as a company, I think at its core, it's composed of two things. So community and content. For context, as John said, I started this after I graduated college, which if it sounds unusual, it's because it is. I think I'm like one of the youngest fund managers. And so a lot of what I built has been from the help and advice of fund managers who have walked this path before. And I've kind of played like a little bit of strategy Frankenstein, getting to work with people who I deeply respect and taking aspects of their fund strategy. And so I think what makes this unique is I grew up digitally native, and the way that I got into venture was building a community on Twitter by writing content. It's also at the core of our sourcing strategy, both on the founder and LP side. And so just like scaling community and content is what I think is at the core of BGV. And we're an early stage venture firm. We focus on investing in, as John said, pre-seed and seed stage companies at the future of work and the future of play. We back great founders like Palette, Beacons, Adely, Averon, The Last Game Board. We've invested in 30 companies so far. Out of those, around 12 have raised follow-on rounds of financing. And we really support founders by giving them access to our community, whether that's for fundraising or advice or support. And then also through content by sharing their stories. And so that's why I think BGV is special. And I also think that given, the way that I was brought up as digital native, I think I provide quite a unique perspective to the founders that we work with. Because I'm not necessarily like going and asking my kids like what the kids are up to nowadays. I'm like living it. So yeah.
And what made you, one of the things that sticks out when it's on your website, even just from talking to you and getting to know you a little bit, you really do put people first, and you really honed in on that, and just on that aspect of being human, putting people first. What made you have that value so core? Like, what made that value so core to you? What was so important about that?
Okay, so I think like a couple things to note for context on this is like, one, I read The Secret, or I watched The Secret like documentary when I was younger, and it's all about like the power of manifestation and like asking for what you want. And I think I also watched this really cool TED Talk about, they're basically like in the room, they have people stand up and they're like, what do you want? And someone will be like, I want to learn to fly a plane, but I can't afford pilot lessons. And then someone else, and then they would be like, okay, if someone else in the audience can help you, like, please stand up and like explain how they can help you. And it was really magical. You saw like people stand up and be like, I'm a pilot instructor. I'm happy to give you free flying lessons. That shouldn't be a burden to you achieving your dreams. And I think there's this really interesting third door that's not talked about, where if you're just super curious about what people are up to and what they're interested in, not a lot of people are just like genuinely like excited or curious about some of these things. I found that. And so I think it was just choosing to wholeheartedly ask for what I wanted, even if a lot of people told me it was like too audacious or that I shouldn't be asking for that. But when I was 19, I was like, all right, I'm going to like start an investment firm. I'm going to write a book, and I want to be on Forbes 30 under 30. So those are kind of like the three goals that I was working towards. And I spent a lot of time like talking to people who had gone through those paths before, had been on Forbes or had written a book, or had started an investment firm. And I was just like, okay, what do I like? How can I practice this now? And then how can I like scale my practice efforts up into like actually doing those things one day? And by just relentlessly pursuing that, I feel like that's where the people first aspect really came in for me, was because I just like put people first and like, yeah, asked a bunch of questions. I think also growing up in like a really supportive family environment has been really crucial to that, because I've seen how instrumental that has been in my early success, in quotation marks, so far, has been having a really strong support system. So I hope to provide that for other people as well.
I appreciate your honesty there about the support system, the background around that. What was it like for people to tell you, especially at 19 or any age, but especially at 19 or 20, they're like, oh, hey, like you're too young for this, you're not ready for it. Like, how did you, I feel like we all deal with that a lot. How did you work through that?
Okay, so I've been working with my coach on this. This is one of the things that I've struggled with in the past, is like overwhelming amounts of feedback. And one of the really important things that I learned through my coach is that feedback that people give you isn't necessarily about you. It's like a projection of themselves onto the world, whether that's positive or negative. You'll find that people often, when they're giving you feedback, whether it's positive, it's often like a trait that they see in themselves, that they are like, oh, I also see that in John. I'm going to like compliment him on it because I think that's really cool. Or it could be something that they know that they're lacking and really appreciate. Then on the other hand, when you receive constructive feedback, it's often because those people are projecting like themselves onto you and being like, I didn't have the opportunity to do this, and that makes me really frustrated. So I'm going to tell you that you also don't have the opportunity to do this. So I think that like in any aspect of feedback, whether that's positive or negative, is up to you as the receiver to determine what that like kernel of truth in it is. And I think that like being a relatively public figure on Twitter and then having like 120 investors, most of whom have a lot more experience than me, has been a really good exercise in understanding how to incorporate feedback rather than just like taking it at face value. But I mean, it's like, it's just never as personal as you think it is. And I think like some of the hardest stuff can be when you get like anonymous online trolls, but that is just like
online trolls.
Yeah. Cause that's like hard, you're like, I think when you like, there's, my friend is counselor, and they were talking about it. They're like, yeah, if you ever get in an altercation, like try and introduce yourself. Cause when you humanize yourself, people like basically take their anger down. But if they just think that you're like some talking head and that they're like an anonymous troll and they can just like anonymously say something negative, then it just like becomes really unhuman. And so I think those can be difficult because you can't really like attribute them to anyone. And so it's kind of hard to be like, well, it's like the kernel of truth. And most often that's like a projection that they're like angry in their own situation and they're taking it out on you.
There's a lot of wisdom in that too. And I admire you for being so public, because of that, obviously I'd have to assume that you do your online trolls, and taking that is hard.
It's a small tax to pay for like the amount of good that being like a really public like tuning fork and finding people that really resonate with me has been. So it's like it comes with the territory. And I think that like I talk to a lot of creators about it. It's just like something that you learn to deal with. Or like my friend would even make mistakes in his video, because like honestly, if you get a lot of negative attention on videos, that's often what goes viral. And so he would like pronounce something wrong or like say something incorrectly, and then everyone would like be like, excuse me, did you mean this, did you mean that? And he knew he made the mistake. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. How do you determine that? You mentioned that kernel of truth. is that more of an art than a science of determining what that truth really is? Like, how do you filter that?
It's a good question. I think it's pretty like intuitive for me, where it's more just like I'm like just reflect on it. I've been reading The Artist's Way recently by Julia Cameron, and in it she like has you go through this exercise where you write down affirmations and then you write down like what your, she calls it a sensor, but like what your sensor blurts out, what those like negative thoughts are. And I find that like doing that exercise where you like receive a piece of feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and just like listen to your thoughts without judging them and like kind of see where that takes you, you'll often like stumble upon the truth, and just like asking more and more questions around like, oh, like, what does this really mean? Like, what is the context of the person that's saying this? Is there something like in their past that might have caused them to be like hyper fixated on this specific thing? So it's all very like case by case basis, but I think just like following your thought pattern and not like initially incorporating at face value whatever the feedback was.
And something too, and one that's a very solid exercise. It sounds very healthy too. What's scary is so every single time we interview someone, I always send them a handwritten card and a book. I was going to send you that book. That is what was
No
scary.
way.
I was literally going to send you that book because I was like,
That's
she
crazy.
probably would like this. That is so funny.
Do you want to know something even crazier? I have had that book in my house for like 7 months. Like I made like this big order of books when I moved in, and I haven't picked it up for the whole time that I've had it. And like just recently on like Wednesday, I was feeling like creative block. And then I watched a YouTube video by Lynette Adkins, and she was talking about The Artist's Way. I was like, oh, I have that book in my house. Like I'll start working on it. So I literally like just started doing my morning pages like 3 days ago, and like,
oh my God,
taking myself on an artist date today. But it's been really helpful to like reflect on things that have been, I think as you go into any business, like you just have more and more experience and can build up like subconscious negative beliefs about like, okay, well, like, for example, like not setting a goal because someone that's achieved that goal that you know is like unhappy. And so like a core negative belief can be like, oh, if I'm like, you know, a multimillionaire, then I'm going to be unhappy. Well, that's like, doesn't need to be true. And like, you can have goals that are monetary or seem like audacious or whatever. And you don't have to be unhappy. So that's so funny. What a coincidence.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, wow, this is like one of those moments. So cool. Let's talk a little about, I'm actually just genuinely curious, which is why I'm asking you a question. How did you know to like build an audience on Twitter, or how to do that? Like it kind of sounds like you.
Oh my God, I didn't at all. I was talking to my chief of staff, Riley, about it. Cause she was like, what's your content, like cadence, whatever. And I was like, honestly, I just vibed online for like a long time. Like it wasn't
what does vibe mean? Give me something here. Like,
okay. Well, when I started, it was COVID. So like, first off, it was like manic energy. Like everyone was online talking about COVID. It was like February of 2020. So it hadn't really like hit the public eye yet. So I honestly would come home and like tell my parents about it and be like, I'm super scared about this thing called COVID, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't being covered by like really any news sources. It was just like people that I followed on Twitter would like retweet it. Like I think like the Andreessen Horowitz offices closed or like wouldn't do handshakes. And it was like this whole like someone wrote a piece on like, this is so dumb, whatever. Like, why aren't they letting people shake hands? And then like, I think it got to a point where I was seeing more and more stuff come out. And then I actually like told my teachers. So like my first like extremely online thing was like, I told my teachers on like March like 8th or something. I was like, oh yeah, I'm not coming to school anymore because I'm like nervous about COVID and it feels like it's getting like serious. And then some of them took it well and some of them were like that. What, like you can't just leave school. And then like March 13th, everything shut down and our school shut down and like the NBA shut down. And I was like, I don't feel as dumb anymore. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that early to it, but I was like a medium adopter of that. But that was what I was living at home with my parents, and like school was just like my teachers were scrambling, even the ones that I really enjoyed going to. I think like some of them got really sad because a lot of them get a lot of joy out of like teaching people and like being in class around like young people's energies. And it was just like, they had to learn all this new technology and like Zoom wouldn't work that well. And it was just like really frustrating for them. So that was sad to see. And it also meant that like, the last like 3 months of my senior year, I was just like, didn't have a job, like was living at my parents' house, had a lot of free time on my hands. And like most of my teachers had kind of like not pieced out all the way, but they were just kind of like, it was nowhere near as intense as like school had been in the months prior. And so I just spent a lot of time on Twitter, and it was cool because it was like these people that like wrote books that I read, or these investors that I would see on like the Midas list or whatever would like reply to tweets. And I'd be like, they're a person that exists in the same dimension as me.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I just started like replying on threads and like, I don't know, making like threads about what I was interested in. I think my first tweet that went viral is like masterclass has the ad budget of Shen Yun. And that was my first like viral tweet. I got a call from like a New York Post journalist, and he was like, I'm writing like an article about your tweet. And I was like, oh my God, this must have my life. And then he didn't end up writing about it. But it was like, that was my first experience going viral, which I think was in like April of 2020. And then I was like, oh, if I tweet random stuff like this, then I'll get random followers who might not be as interested in like venture or startup stuff as I am. So maybe I'll keep most of my content to like venture and startup stuff. And then like, I'll have like a smaller portion that's just random stuff that I'm interested in, or like funny quotes or whatever. And so I think like I made that transition, and then I started doing a lot of threads on just like breaking things down and explaining them. And yeah, but I've never had like a content cadence. I just was a college student with a lot of free time and no outlet. So that was how a lot of my creative pursuits on Twitter started. I think it's honestly been a bit harder, like now being in the role and like having responsibilities outside of vibing online.
Well, I admire how it all came together. It's just amazing to me that you could like post something out and it's just people catch fire. The whole, well, actually, I should ask you, how does it feel to be viral? How does it feel to go viral?
Oh my God, the dopamine hits like insane. Insane. Actually, it was funny because I was watching like Riley, who's my two staff, she like posted something. I think I had posted, and I was like, all right, everyone like give a warm Twitter welcome to Riley. And she had like 20 followers or something. And then she gained like 200 followers overnight, and her analytics were going crazy and her phone was blowing up. And she was like, I think before you have that moment on Twitter, you like don't really get why people are like always posting. But I think that there is like a pretty severe like dopamine hamster wheel that you can get on as a content creator. And this goes for like whatever platforms you're on, whether that's Instagram or YouTube or Twitter. But I think like that first experience of going viral is so pure until it isn't. And then like you get random haters from like the side of Twitter that has no context for what you're talking about. Like my favorite are like the, well, actually guys, like where like when the masterclass one went viral, people were like, well, actually, like this is like the fact, whatever. And like things that go viral on the internet are generally half truths. And you kind of have to expect that someone's going to be like, well, actually, here's like the rest of it. Yeah, so I think it was kind of like, it was really cool. And I was like, oh, this is super powerful. I ended up like, I think I might have, gotten my job from that tweet. Honestly, I met a bunch of really cool people because like people in the venture world were like tagging their friends. Like Brie Kimmel like tagged Kelly Wursler, who's like my design icon. And I had just finished her masterclass class. And I was like, oh my gosh, like two of my icons have just commented on my tweet. And then I like replied back to Brie and I was like, I'm sending you a cold email right now, blah, blah, blah. Like, can't believe you commented on my tweet. I was like fangirling. And then like flash forward a year, and I had like stayed at her house in LA and we're like good friends. And, now we both run funds. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Awesome. I have yet to meet Kelly, but I'm manifesting meeting her. I've really been enjoying like, interior decorating is exciting to me. I feel like that's one of the reasons I was like, it would be awesome to be wealthy in the future because my sense of interior design, almost solely due to Kelly Wearstler, has gotten much more expensive.
I don't know if you're gonna have to worry about that. But anyway, so I absolutely love that. How I do want to talk about something that I know is important to both you and I. Switching gears here, you mentioned COVID. How did you maintain, especially through COVID, just the mental health? I know it's a really important aspect for you. How did you maintain mental health? How did you, I don't think a lot of people struggle to keep it together.
I don't have a great answer to this. Like, honestly, I was quarantining with my family and I got 9 months of like uninterrupted family time that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise. Like I was like about to like move out and graduate college and I was like doing my own thing, whatever. And then COVID happened. I got like 9 months of uninterrupted family time, like hanging out with my brothers. My brother and I read a book together. I just got to spend so much time with my family. And so honestly, like for me, it was like stressful, but it felt like we were a team all throughout it. So yeah, I don't really have any tips on mental health. I think it just goes back to like having a strong support network and investing in it and realizing that like strong relationships are really built during like difficult times where you're going through something difficult together rather than they are on like fun, happy times. I think it like the fun, happy times mean a lot more when you've like gone through some hard stuff with them.
Just out of curiosity, do you have like we're getting a little nitty gritty here, but do you have like a workout regimen, like a meditation thing that you do? Like what?
Yeah.
Do you do? Like I think. Yeah, I'm curious. I think you'll watch and be curious. Like, how do you keep it? Especially you're 23. You're running a venture capital firm. How do you keep that together?
I did girl boss my way into a lot of responsibility, huh? Yeah, my
super adult.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to my coach. I was like, Mindy, I feel so adult, and she was like, Paige, you actually are an adult. Like, you crossed that threshold when you turned 18. And I was like, I know, but like a real one. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Things like calling a plumber, that felt very adult. But anyways, to my workout, like meditation routine. So I started surfing 2 years ago. I live in San Diego. I've lived in San Diego pretty much my whole life. So it's kind of embarrassing that I didn't do that earlier, but now I live a lot closer to the beach. And so it's accessible for me to surf like every day. And so, and then a bunch of my friends surf, which is so fun. So like yesterday we went out at like sunset and like there's this like beautiful yellow mist on the water and like you're watching everyone else like dance on these waves. And it's also like a crazy workout. Like I burn like 650 calories. I think like when you're in a position where you're in a lot of stress, it may seem counterintuitive, but literally taking like an hour out of your day where you're like sweating and like hard exercise, it just like flattens everything. Like I feel like when you're getting stressed, things stack up. They stack up. And then like something happens that's so small and it just like takes you off like immensely more than it should. And I think that especially comes up in like your friendships and stuff like that. Like you can just kind of like get annoyed at your friend or your family member. And so I think that like, or like even your teammate at your company. So I think like it's really important to maintain like a sense of flatness. And for me, I get that flatness from surfing, but other people get it from the gym. But I think like it's like really important to like break a sweat. I think that's like been really important. I don't meditate as much as I used to, but now I've been doing my morning pages, which is 3 pages of like free form writing where you just like follow your thoughts and like write them down and don't judge them. So I feel like that's pretty similar to meditating.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And the breaking the sweat thing too, for the record, there's definitely something to that. I was just talking with, as I mentioned, so Graham Betchart, he's a good mentor of mine, a friend, and he's the MBA mental skills coach I work for. And we were just talking about that on the interview I just did. I asked him what he does. And he's like working out and breaking a sweat every single day.
100%. It just like flattens you out. And I think you really need that, especially like in any position where your main job is to make decisions. Like my main job is to make decisions. And I only get to, I made 30 of them. Well, I've made more that have been no's, but I've only made 30 yes decisions, but I probably made like 1,000 no decisions. And for me, like having that like open mind means that I can more thoughtfully make decisions. And so it's like really important that I prioritize that in my life.
I want to transition a little bit. You mentioned your book. What is Seed to Harvest? And do you mind telling a little bit of people, just a little bit about like, why you wrote it?
Yeah. Sure. I accidentally fell into writing a children's book. I'd always wanted to write a book, but I wasn't specific about what it was. I think that's a funny thing about manifestation, that I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book, but I wasn't specific about what kind that it would be. And so my friend Nikhil, who I recently had on my podcast, Seed to Harvest, he wrote an illustrated children's book about medical trials and like explain what they were. And I was like, oh, I love that idea. And at the time I had built this tech and VC, the foundation Notion doc. And I was just like, there's not like a great intro to venture. Like you can read Venture Deals by Brad Feld, incredible book. It's also 300 pages. Like you can't like, read it, get a summary and like brush up on it in like 10, 15 minutes. And that's what I was looking for as I was building this tech and VC, the foundation doc. So I had already been doing a bunch of research on, what are kind of like the foundational aspects of venture. And then that was combined with my parents telling me that I couldn't talk about Twitter drama at the dinner table unless I explained venture to them. And so the worlds just kind of collided. And then I also worked with my community to write Seed to Harvest. So I sent out early drafts that were like 10 pages long to like 80 people. A bunch of people wrote back with like pages of feedback. And then I set up like a community number, which is a really cool company. They're backed by like 776. They basically allow you to build like text-based communities. And so I would send out my drafts. I also raised like $5,000 on GoFundMe to hire an illustrator because I had no money after college to pay for one. And I ended up doing test pages with 4 people I met on the internet. And my younger brother also submitted a test page. His was my favorite. He's an incredible conceptual artist. And yeah, we ended up like working together. So I was living at my parents' house and we were collaborating on the book. And then I moved out. I lived with like 10 girls that I met from college. And so that was really funny aspect of the creative process. Was like I was living in this like little shoebox apartment and I had like 40 pages of Seed to Harvest like on my apartment floor. And it was like in place of a rug, like I had 40 pages. And like whenever a breeze would come in, it was super hot because we're living in San Diego. Whenever a breeze would come in, I'd have to like reorganize them. But I had them on the floor to like remind me to like work on it every day and try to improve it. There's definitely a point where I was just like, oh, like no one cares about this. Like, why am I writing this? So dumb. But it was just like about like continuing to go through the process. I think every creative hits that point. And I think what made it even better was having people that were really excited about the process. One of them I'll give a shout out to is David Wong, who's he's director of design at Webflow. And he, without knowing me, contributed $500 to my GoFundMe. And I was like, who's this random stranger that just gave me $500 to hire an illustrator? And I like sent him a DM. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is so kind. Like, can we hop on a phone call? And him and me and Owen ended up hopping on a phone call and he was talking to Owen all about like incorporating art into your work, and what being a designer is like. And then he was also telling us about his passion for art and just like being a patron of the arts, which I thought was really cool. He ended up being like one of the first investors in my syndicate, was one of the first commits to my first fund, and just has been an incredible supporter. I couldn't be more grateful to have him in my corner. And he's also inspired a lot of designers to angel invest. Yeah. And then after Owen finished all the illustrations, then we went through formatting. I worked with my friend Cass on formatting and did self-publishing through Amazon Kindle digital printing, which was so awful. It was like the best option, but it sucked. So
if you could tell us about the release and the missing letters.
Oh yeah. So we released the book and then the font that we had used, I was like, okay, so this is like the week of my graduation. We've been submitting it, gets rejected. And they just give you like a random error message. They're like, oh, the formatting's off. And you're like, well, it's a 50-page book. Can you like be a bit more specific? And so we're trying to edit the margins and adding this and that, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. And then finally, on the day of my graduation, I'm walking across the stage. I had actually like officially graduated the year before, but this was like our ceremony post-COVID, in quotation marks, in 2021, published. My roommates were downstairs. Everyone was drinking. People's parents were there. I was doing my makeup. I was getting dressed up. And then I get this email. It's like, Seed to Harvest is available for publish. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be doing like all this launch marketing and I'm not going to do it. So I literally just like tweeted out one tweet and I was like, a banger, like it's out. I was like, we wrote this book together. And then I was trying to like reply to people and engage with people who are commenting and like try and coordinate. And my parents are coming to pick me up and I like hadn't eaten and like my friend passed out from heat stroke. And it was just like a whole crazy day. And like, also I had this was going like semi-viral on the internet. So yeah. And then 3 days later, so I hadn't had a chance to pick up an early copy. And 3 days later, I'm driving to go pick up a bottle of champagne. My manager at the time, shout out Sandy, she's also an investor in our fund. My manager at the time had ordered me champagne. She's like, I'm so excited, blah, blah, blah. I got it from Drizzly and Drizzly just like totally messed up my order. So I had to go to like a local liquor store to pick it up. So I remember just like vividly sitting in my car and my friend FaceTimes me and he's like, Paige, like, don't freak out. And I was like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Oh my God. And he showed me the book that his friend had received and it was missing 4 letters. So I think it was like F-A-E and like T, which were all very present in the book. And I was like, oh no. But it was only in like the commentary font. It wasn't in the main font, I don't think, but there was a lot of commentary, like caption font in there. So yeah, 126 copies of my book shipped, missing all these letters. And then I called one of my friends, Justin Potts, who I invested in his company of Benefy, which just got acquired this past year. And he was just like, you should name it like the coloring book edition. Like it's limited edition. You can never get it back. Like you're going to upload the new one. No one ever gets that edition ever again. And like to this day, like I only have one copy and people have asked me about it. I'm like, I literally don't have one. Like you have to go ask someone. And then Amazon doesn't tell me who buys my stuff, which is crazy because like people who bought my stuff are like crazy ballers. They're just like casually mentioning like, oh yeah, I have your book. Like, one of the speakers at the All In Summit was like, oh my gosh, like you're the one that wrote that book. Like I ordered it for my kid. And I was like, what? This is crazy. So yeah, I had no idea who ordered it, no way to reach out to them, to tell them. So yeah, it was quite exciting. My heart's pumping just thinking about it.
Yeah. How did you deal with all that? Like, cause then the thought becomes, oh God, like, at least for me, if I was sitting there, I'd be like, oh God, what do people think of the product I put out? Right. You're like, wow, like this doesn't.
I did get a couple, I got a couple of DMs that were like not stoked on it, but it was also like, I know people are along for the ride. And also they were like, oh, now we have like limited edition books. That's pretty sick. So I think that reframe was really helpful. I think there was like a point where I was like, oh, what are people going to think of it? And I was like, honestly, like who else can say that they've written and self-published a book? Like I had to like learn how to do this all by myself. So it's like, of course there are going to be bumps along the way. Like, of course I'm going to have a blind side when it comes to like thinking like never would I have put missing 4 letters in the other font on my bingo card for like what was going to mess up. Like Amazon told me it was chill, like, so I have beef with Amazon, but they still send me money every month. So
Nice.
Can't hate too much. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think the core lesson there is like, just in the end, just like make the best of it and just ship something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like,
so it's like, don't expect your first product to be perfect. Like it's just, if you're shipping it, well, it's like a running like saying in the startup community, but like if you're shipping it and it's perfect, you're shipping it too late. So
Okay. We've talked about a lot today, and I just, we're heading towards obviously the back half of the interview. I want to ask you, the core question of the show is, what has been your best decision ever? It doesn't have to be as a VC. It can be in your entire life. What has been your best decision ever?
yeah, I mean, we chatted about it before I came on the show, but I think the best decision for me was choosing my family over my career super early on. I was going through the interview process with a venture firm called OpenView in Boston. And I went all the way through the interview. I love the team. They're super content oriented, like have a great brand. They're focused on things that I was interested in. And I ultimately ended up turning down their offer. I would have been like their youngest associate. Ended up turning down their offer because I wanted to stay in San Diego. And I mean, personally, I don't think I could have faced a Boston winter, but also my family was in San Diego. And that was like the bigger part of the decision. But that happened in February of 2020. And then I ended up being home for COVID. And I was just so grateful I had made that decision. And it's like really paid off because the constraint of me being in San Diego means that like I have to do business in a different way than other people do. So for example, like our firm has been relatively distributed. Like both of the new members of our team are in San Diego now, and I would love to like have an office here, but I like anticipate our investing will remain like broadly across the US and Canada, perhaps extending internationally later on. And I just really enjoy like investing remote first and then getting to meet awesome folks in person. As I do like the conference circuit, so that's been really fun. But it's been really nice. And like I come back home after I'm like at a conference, I go for a surf, I hang out with my family, I hang out with my friends. A lot of my friends don't work in tech, which is really nice. And I think it keeps me pretty grounded. And yeah, I feel like that's been a decision that's really paid off because it's applied creative constraints to like how I do business and like conduct myself. And I don't think I would have like written a book or started a venture fund this early had I not had that constraint of like, all right, if I'm in San Diego and there's not a venture firm that really fits my prerogative that I want to work with, then like, what do I do? And so helped me get to my goals a lot faster, which I didn't anticipate at all when I made that decision, but it's been really cool.
How did you have the courage to make that choice? Because I think a lot of people, I remember even coming out of college, which wasn't that long ago, my buddy and I being like, oh, we've got to be in this city because that's where stuff's happening. And if we don't, we're going to miss out. Like, how did you have the courage to go a different direction?
So like the day that I made the decision, it was kind of like, all right, I was supposed to give them my decision. I'd actually like decided to go the other way. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Boston. I'm going to accept this role. I had my email typed out. And then I was like, I'm going to wait for one more day. I'm going to like see, I was just like, all right, universe, if you got any signs,
That's awesome.
definitely send them to me now. And that was the day that Kobe Bryant died. And so immediately all over social media was like, Kobe put his family first over everything, like make sure to hug your loved ones like a bit tighter. And I was like, all right, universe, like you got me. And someone had posted this incredible piece by Tim Urban, who writes the blog Wait But Why, called The Tail End. And basically like the premise of the article is that you think that your life is measured in weeks and months, but it's actually not. It's actually measured by the like times that you like get to have breakfast with your mom, or like the times that you get to sit on your like front porch with your siblings, or like the times that you get to eat pizza in New York. And those things are all not linear. And he talked about how like moving away from his parents had made him realize that he like cut dramatically like the amount of times that he would get to spend with his family and childhood friends down like so much. And his question, I'm trying to think about how it ended, but it was basically like really struck me where I was like, oh, if I move to Boston, like I'm like cutting down the time that I can spend with my family, like dramatically, like, and like I'm the only one with the agency to make this decision. Like no one can sway me, but I am making the decision to like cut down dramatically the time that I've spent with my family in the future. And then like if I end up like meeting someone and settling down on the East Coast, like that continuously, like those choices compound. And so after I read that, I like came out and I was like in tears and I was like, all right, I decided like I'm not going to go to Boston. And I had a really special moment in May of this year. I went to the All In Summit, and Tim Urban, who wrote that article, was a speaker. And my friend brought me into like the VIP area. And he was like standing there, and it was so cool because I got to have like a 30-minute conversation about how much that article had changed my life and how I had ended up, on the cover of Forbes and like had written a book and had started a venture firm and got to spend so much time with my family. And it was a really cool full circle moment. And I was like, as a writer myself, like, I feel like that's what I get the most, where I feel the most impact is when people are like, oh, like, you writing this got me a job in venture and I'm working somewhere that I like, was dreaming of when I was younger, or like you writing this led me to lead my first syndicate or write my first angel check. And I was like, I can't imagine what impact that this has had like across, across you, like writing it and seeing how people's lives ended up. And I was so glad that I had met him after I had gone through making that decision, coming out the other side and realizing the impact that it truly had on my life. And yeah, so that was like a really special moment for me, was getting to meet Tim, who like ultimately really heavily influenced, without knowing it, my decision to stay in San Diego. And yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I'm sure, cool is not even the right word for it. But one of the last questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you make decisions? Like, do you have a process that you either reflecting now, or even maybe you consciously have one of making big decisions?
I think just like sitting with my thoughts, like I was saying earlier, when it's like when you're thinking about incorporating someone's feedback, like I view that as a decision. And so it's just like finding time by myself. Like I try to like go surfing or exercise before I do this. Like I try not to like think about a decision while I'm exercising, but like after I come back, like, dead tired, I just like sit with my thoughts and like think about all the different options. I'm definitely not like a pro cons list maker, but I do want to like just let my mind wander and like see what it comes up with. Cause I find that having a really structured decision-making process sometimes cuts you off from like your more interesting, like creative thoughts around something, or you find something surprising. I would say there's obviously like thinking around, like, does this align with my values and long-term goals? Is this, if it's an investment decision, is this someone I will be, and a mission that I will be proud to stand behind for the next 10 to 12 years? Is this who I want to be bringing into our community? Do I think that I can like add value to their company? Like, am I the best investor for them? And so I think it's just like sitting with those thoughts. I would say, like I said, I'm very like people first. I'm very values oriented. And so those things kind of like bleed into my decision making.
Like being clear on your values, give yourself some time to think.
Yeah.
Before we ask the final question, where can people learn more about you? Where can they find you?
Okay. Well, if you like podcasts, I run a podcast called Seed to Harvest. It's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to podcasts. Also, like we post full videos on YouTube. And then if you want to learn more about venture, you can order Seed to Harvest on Amazon. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, that would be pretty cool as well. I'm Paige Finn with 3 N's. I tweet a lot of stuff about venture, and then some shit posting. I have been doing more recently. But yeah, that's where you can find me. And then if you're a founder and you're listening to this and you're interested in working with us, there is an application form on the Behind Genius Ventures website. So, yeah.
The last question is the final question is, what advice would you have for someone that is on the other side of making the big decision? Maybe they're like you and they're deciding, should I move across the country or not? Or should I start a venture capital firm, change my job? What advice would you give them in making that decision?
I think going internal is really important. I think that one of the things that I was scared of when I was making the decision was, what will other people think of me? And I think when I went internally and thought about what really mattered to me, that's when I got my true decision. I think like I base this a lot on like gut instinct and intuition, but I think going into your body and like doing some meditation and like feeling really grounded can help you like find that gut feeling. Cause I think like a lot of us can become like quite separated between like our minds and our bodies. And I think that there's some really great pieces on like body intelligence, but I think that like feeling really connected, because we hold feelings of like stress or decision, whatever, in our bodies.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I think like that's why I think it's really important to sit with your thoughts and be super present, is you can often find like, for example, like your throat gets tight or like your chest feels tight or like there's like a weird tingling feeling, like your body, it like reflects your subconscious often. So like when you take a deep breath and you like relax your shoulders, like it's very subconscious to be in your head all the time. And I think that like listening to your body and like what your gut is telling you is the piece of advice that I would have. I think that like also whenever you make a big decision, you're going to disappoint someone. Just have that in mind in advance. And like, it's going to suck. But if you're moving in alignment with who you are as a person, then ultimately like you're setting the healthy boundaries that, you know, will support you for the long term. And also like people will respect you for making a decision that honors your choices. They're not going to respect you as much if you make a decision that is more on external forces, and you're unhappy about it. So that would be my advice, is like, expect that you're going to disappoint people on some side of the equation, and then also listen to your gut.
Listen to your gut, make a decision in line with your values.
Paige, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Guys, take what you learned here and please use it, and I'll talk to you soon.